All right. Let's dive into this thing. Let's dive into this. This is just going to be a design commentary on RUNE. Hey, yeah, it's good to have you finally catch a stream. If you're watching this later, obviously this was streamed, and stream is a good word to keep in mind here. This is just going to be a stream of consciousness sort of thing. I have no script, as with every video I do. I have no plans on what I'm going to say. I just start talking, and then we see how it goes. And this is a design commentary video. So I've done a few of these for previous games to kind of give you an insight on where the games come from, how did it become what it became, and everything like that. So, you know, I find these sorts of insights helpful when I'm digesting a game that I'm really into and I want to know how the creator got to the decision points that they did. Like Chris Bizet doing this with the Dragon game, with the written copy was awesome. There's lots of great examples of this. So yeah, we're gonna just dive into RUNE here. I've got it pulled up in Affinity, because I don't know, I guess this is my main platform by which I stream things now, is I do all my design, my note-taking, and now videos from Affinity. Also, this is total open book. Like, if folks have questions about RUNE or anything like that, feel free to post them either in chat if you're watching live or after the fact. I can, you know, take a look and answer those questions hopefully for you later on. So what is RUNE? RUNE is my solo tabletop RPG. It's inspired by Souls-like games, so your Bloodborns, Elden Rings, Dark Souls, Demon Souls, that sort of stuff. Little background on RUNE before we dive into the specifics of the game itself. RUNE kind of came from two different places. One was a roguelike dungeon crawl board game that my friend Mike Riemann and I were working on a long time ago. So Mike and I used to try to design board games. And I had this idea for a roguelike dungeon crawl game where you use dice to determine what the enemies were going to be doing. This is before we like Gloomhaven had come out, and we learned like the card AI for Gloomhaven and stuff like that. And so, you know, wanted to create a thing that you could play by yourself or with friends, dungeon crawl, die a lot, get cool gear. Gear was pretty much all that mattered. And we did like some playtests at Mike's house, and it was fun, but like any other board game designer, we got distracted by something else, and it just, you know, it never manifested. Flash forward a few years later, actually quite a number of years later, last year specifically, and I am thinking, well, was it last year or the beginning of this year? Who fucking knows? I was trying to make a solo Lumen game. I was thinking about making a Lumen game that was a solo Lumen game, and I wasn't sure how to do it. And I had this kind of concept of your weapon was the thing that determined your powers from like the Lumen engine. And how did that happen? Well, you carved runes into your weapons to kind of like shape the way that it worked. So I already had kind of like this rune carving thing going on, and wanting to do a solo game, solo RPG, in this sort of like weird dark fantasy sort of vibe. And then that kind of just changed. So many people are messaging me on Discord about the Gizmodo thing. This is very cool. I gotta look at that later. So flash forward to me kind of just like smashing that peanut butter and jelly together, shifting away from the idea of making it a Lumen game into something else entirely, because Lumen just wasn't doing it for me. Also, trying to come up with like good GM tools for a Lumen game it wasn't satisfying to me as a solo Lumen game. So I kind of abandoned the Lumen aspect, but I borrowed ideas from past Spencer to eventually create RUNE. So aesthetic vibes from the solo Lumen game combined with mechanical concepts that I had with that roguelike dungeon crawl board game. We had it all set up where you were like flipping out like cards at random to like build your dungeon, so you never knew what the next room was, and then like you flip monsters from the pile of monsters. It was really cool. So that all kind of became RUNE, which today is now the solo Souls-like RPG that I mentioned before. Cover art, Eddie York. God, Eddie does a phenomenal job with everything that he does. Eddie and I have worked before in the past. He did all of the spark art for Nova and the cover art for Nova. So getting him to do the cover art for RUNE was an obvious choice. It's an unbelievably catchy cover. It got a lot of people to stop and look at our booth at PAX because they saw the big RUNE banner and they wanted to know more. So good art sells. Anyway, I'm gonna highlight some, like, we're not gonna read everything in the book, but we're gonna just kind of highlight things that I think are important about RUNE as we flip through the book. So, you're gonna see lots of references to this word right here, Oberyn. Oberyn is my homebrew fantasy setting from a campaign that I ran like 6 years ago. It's something that I'm gonna use for a future game. But this takes place in a timeline in which Oberyn has finally been destroyed. And when you see the fantasy game in the future, you'll see why it's breaking into pieces and everything. But it's finally been destroyed. Which means it's all broken up into these just different realms that you're going to explore. And there's a lot of talk about fate in the game as well. Your ability to kind of dictate your own fate as one of these accursed immortal beings called the Engraved. Shout out to Aaron Jalla for the name Engraved. Really was struggling to come up with a name for it, and Aaron came through in a big way there. Again, just to kind of highlight the crew that was behind this, Eddie doing the cover art. Charlie Ferguson Avery was an absolute amazing person to work with the interior art. Just produces massive amounts of really high quality spot art to use in your games. Absolutely hire Charlie. Used the Grim Coast, I used the Perilous Shores generator by Wadabao for all the maps. And here's my inspiration: Souls-like games and the only band I listened to in all of 2022, Spanish love songs. Go listen to Brave Faces, everyone. It's the only album I listened to all of 2022. All right. Here, again, like, here's some of the art that Charlie did, which I think is just phenomenal. So it's a solo game, and a lot of people have asked me, like, at PAX, what a solo RPG is. And I think if you're watching this, you're probably generally familiar with the concept. But a lot of people seemed surprised that that was something that you could do, that you could play a game solo by yourself. And specifically, I want to highlight that I designed this as a solo RPG that is kind of unlike what you see with a lot of solo RPGs, which are those like journaling games where you have prompts and things like that. Not to disparage those games at all. I think they're fantastic. I've made them. But I wanted to do something that felt distinctly different from that. That had some of that exploration element, but also had something gamier in like combat. Because I have learned in the last year or two that I like gamey systems. I'm not going to read through the history, the very brief history of Oberyn that's provided here, but it will give you a sense of a little bit of that world that I've been cooking for a long time of my life. Basically, there's these greater powers. They have a what I call a starved hound that they sick on worlds to devour them, and it turns out that sometimes goes wrong, and it creates the realms. Runes are a big part of this. The powers, pieces of powers of the beings that kind of created Oberyn. Well, not really created, they infested Oberyn. They left some of their pieces of power in Oberyn itself. Those things turned into runes. Those runes drew the attention of everybody in the realms. And the people who were able to seize the runes became the Rune Lords. And those are going to be the bosses that you see in every realm. You are an Engraved. You're one of these people who's gonna die time and again because it is your fate. But you're also one of the few people who can actually carve runes into your being. You can strip them from the rune lords. God, look at Charlie's art. Look at Charlie's art. It's just so good. It's just so good. So Rune is decidedly a game that is in 2 different modes. I think I'm starting to like really embrace this concept of like multimodal play, where it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to handling how a game is played, especially in something like a role-playing game, where there is generally a great degree of freedom in what you can do or what you want to do. It only makes sense to me that we have multiple systems in place within the game to support those things individually, rather than trying to come up with a singular system that handles everything. So like, I'm not saying Lumen does this perfectly, but like, if you look at Nova, for example, combat is, you're basically not rolling any dice at all. You're just doing this resource management thing as you're like deciding what powers to use to take out enemies. And then whenever you're doing stuff outside of combat, then you're going into this dice pool rolling system and not doing that resource management thing. They're kind of like 2 different approaches woven into the same game. You can see this taken to the extreme with things like Lancer or Icon, right? Where it's multiple, like 2 different systems smashed together. Something that I think I will probably do with my fantasy game. And that's what's going on here in Rune, is I wanted to capture that element of exploration, wandering a kind of a lonely, cursed place, which is sort of the vibes that you get in a lot of those Souls-like games. But also I wanted tactical combat, because tactical combat is a really important part of those Souls-like games. And so how could you do that with one system that does everything? I don't think you would do either of them to a satisfactory degree, or you would lack in one if you try to apply the same coat of paint to everything. So talking a little bit about how exploration works, or how it came about. When I was first designing exploration components, where you had this you had these maps. Let me go down to the Grim Coast map just to give you a sense, right? You had these maps. Originally in Rune, it was hex maps. It was hex maps at first, and I was trying to fill way too many hex maps, or hexes. And even on small maps where it was only like 21 hexes, 21 hexes is just way too many hexes to write for me at least. I don't enjoy writing that many hexes worth of material. But 7 points in a point crawl sort of aspect was much more enticing to me. So Rune was originally this hex crawl component that you would move hex by hex, and you would do the things that are in the hexes, change to a point crawl system because it just better suited what I was going for. Oh, Sir Heck, you're in an Icon game right now. That's awesome. Yeah, I think Icon is a super cool system. So when I was trying to figure out what you were going to do at these points, right? I eventually figured out, okay, it's points, it's paths, you're moving around a map and everything like that. But what are you going to be doing? And originally, I had the game essentially as a giant choose your own adventure, where on a on a given page, like you would read, here's the point, right? Here's what, we go back down to our map down here, and we're like, okay, so we're in the village over here at point 2. And there's a bunch of different things that you could do, like search this building, or and mostly it was like search or go look at this thing. And then you would flip to a specific page that would follow, and that would tell you what you would do, or what would be there. And it was very intentionally written so that you wouldn't be able to see everything that was going on at the point at just a glance. That you knew the things that you could, like the approaches you could take at the place, but then the outcomes, you didn't know until you flipped to that page and you were in that outcome. Very choose your own adventure sort of style. And that just became a fucking pain in the ass to write, as you can imagine. You know, knowing some friends who are working on choose your own adventures sort of games right now, and just thinking how hard that is. Just an incredible amount of work that goes into doing something like that. And it just didn't grasp the way that I wanted it to go. So I instead abstracted out the general categories of things that you could find. Like, what were the things that you would have been finding when you flipped to those pages? You would have been finding items, you would have been learning about the area, you would have been finding enemies that you suddenly had to fight, or there would be like those like locked doors sort of situations, right? It's a locked door that, okay, you know it's here, but you need something in order to get past it. So I just took that concept and I abstracted it out to the 4 possible actions, and I just decided to list them all on the page. Rather than doing all this flipping around, the player is already playing solo by themselves. I can't dictate or police if they're flipping ahead to different pages, and I honestly don't care if they are. So just having all the information right there on a single page, rather than a bunch of small blurbs on separate pages, condensed the book in an important way, but also just allowed me to figure out these are the 4 things that generally people were doing: searching, learning, delving, and then fighting. So yeah, these are the actions that you see in RUNE then. Pretty much every time that you want to do any of these 3 things, searching, learning, and delving, you can do them on their own, but if there's a fight at a point, you have to do that fight first, right? And that just represents, like, you roll up on a location in Elden Ring and there's a bunch of goons there. Like, you can try and like go grab a bunch of things, but the goons will fight you. They will try and kill you. So you got to clear them out, right? Clear them out, and then you can take your time searching, which is typically where you're going to get like one and done items, like consumables and stuff like that. Learning, which gets you increase your lore score, which we'll talk a lot about because I love lore. And then delving, which delving kind of represents like learning, searching, and fighting all at the same time, but with like a requirement. Usually you need like a certain lore score or access to an item that you found somewhere else in order to get it. So it's that, like I said, that locked door thing. Oberyn is a god's grave. Which god's grave is it, though? We'll find out. No, you won't. You won't find out here. Obviously, being a Souls-like game, you needed to be able to die. And die a lot. And not have it be the worst thing in the world. Sigil points are the equivalent of, like, bonfires or, you know, the lamps in Bloodborne and stuff like that. It's how you come back, right? They also have the ability to rest, and just like in those games, if you die or rest, the map resets. Now, what does the map resetting look like in RUNE? Again, let's look back at our map here. It's not like any of these points necessarily change, but specifically what happens is any fights that you have completed get unmarked. So you're like constantly checking and unchecking boxes as you go through these different locations, right? So here's an example, right? Here's the village. You'd be checking these boxes as you do things. If you finish this fight and then you died at a future point, this fight is back, right? And that's just like we see in Souls-like games, where those things, you know, enemies keep coming back time and again. Lore. This is the thing I want to talk about a lot, because I think lore is very cool. I think lore is cool from like a conceptual level, just like nerding out about lore. I have been watching a lot of lore videos while packing these RUNE books behind me. I just love listening to people talk about worlds and stories and lore of things. It's so good. Oh, that's a great, it's a great emote, the lore emote. So I love getting real nerdy with shit like this, right? And so in Souls-like games, the lore is never overtly given to you, right? Like, very rarely is there like this long spout of exposition where like the history of the world is explained to you, or the backstory of this boss is explained to you. What more typically happens is you find like little snippets of things to read from like item descriptions or enemy descriptions and stuff like that. And they are never like overtly describing what's going on, but instead you are putting together the pieces yourself. I love that. So I wanted to capture that in Rune as well, which means I do not do a lot of explicit exposition of the story of a given realm. I have in my head a general concept of the story of the realm that you're in when you're in it at a given time. But what my story is and what I think is going on might not be the story that you weave together with the things that you read along the way. Experience this again. Aaron created that Coral Rock realm very early on in Rune's like public-facing development, and I played it, and it was really cool because I'm putting together like pieces of what I think the story is and talking about it out loud, and Aaron's watching and he knows what he knows the story is, and we weren't like 100% in line, which is cool, right? Like I had a different interpretation than the creator of the realm. But that wasn't like a failing of the realm, but it was just, that's how I saw what happened at Coral Rock. So I wanted that element in Rune. And it's done through the lore stat. This is basically one of 3 stats that your character has. You have health, which you die a lot. You have your stamina, which is basically always 2d6. And changes in some situations, and then lore, which resets every time you go to a new realm, because you're learning new stuff. And lore is, you get it from the learn action as you're at a point, and you just get like a little nugget. You increase your lore score by 1, you get a little bit of a nugget of what's going on, and now your character is a little bit more aware of what's going on in the realm. And this is intentionally there to not only just help you appreciate the realm and learn about it, but it can give you mechanical benefits in like being able to avoid fights. Like for example, in the realm that's in the main rule book, the Grim Coast, if you have a high enough lore score, you can skip some like brutal fights that are going to like try to wear you down as you access the boss. Like I mentioned before, some delve actions require lore scores, right? Items and weapons can change if you have a lore score of a certain value, right? Lots and lots of ways that the lore score can interact with the realm. And a big thing that we haven't really talked much about is that all the realms are unique in their rules. And so how the lore score is used changes on a realm-to-realm basis. I think the lore thing is probably one of the coolest aspects of Rune. The realm clock was designed as a means of like not necessarily controlling the pace of play for the player, but like providing a little push. Because if this was if I had removed that like choose your own adventure aspect where like once you did something you couldn't go back or stuff like that, and it was here's all the actions, there was really nothing stopping a player from just moving from one point, doing all the actions, moving to the next point, doing all the actions, moving it, right? And you could kind of go through it very sequentially and accomplish everything. And there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But I wanted there to be a sense of some sort of like push to what you prioritized while you're playing the game. So the realm clock is unique for every realm in terms of what it's tracking and how it's tracking, but it is some sort of system in place that dictates how long you can be in the realm or how much you can fuck around before things start to like backfire. Now, in the example realm in the rulebook, it's very low stakes. It's just switching between day and night, which changes the actions that you have access to. But in some of the other realms that you'll see in the Realm Atlas, they're literally like a clock that says you have this many actions to take in the realm, and then it's over. Then the Rune Lord is here, and you have to go, which means you can't do everything here. Or the longer you fuck around, the more big changes happen in the realm, and suddenly you might just lose access to a point. It's just gone now, because you spend so much time doing other things. The realm clock can be like really a big push and an incentive. It can also be just a gentle little guide, right? And I like that flexibility in terms of the role that it plays. So you're moving around. The clock is kind of dictating what's going on. You are learning and searching and delving, but then eventually you get into these fights, right? Like I said, a one-size-fits-all system for things would not have worked. I'm already, though, thinking ahead in the future how, like, different combat's going to be for the Nova hack of this, where you're the Voyager Spark, where combat's going to be very different. But how I wanted combat here is I wanted to capture that Souls-like experience. What a great piece of art by Charlie, first of all. I mean, look at this fucking thing. It's nasty. It's so good. Charlie's an incredible artist. And just a really good dude. I got to meet him at PAX finally in person. That was a really great experience. So, what are the foundational aspects of Souls-like combat? You die a lot. Okay. Yes, how sparingly the red is used? Right. When I was working with Charlie, it was just like, just a pop of color on all of this stuff, right? Like, it's harsh line art with just this little bit of color. And again, I've mentioned this on previous streams, but it's a good time to mention it now in case you haven't seen any of them. I got interested in working with Charlie in the first place when he sent me this piece of art. When I ordered one of his games, he sent me this art with it. And I was like, hey, can you just make like a bunch of this? It's going to be the official art of RUNE now. So, Souls-like combat. You die a lot, right? It's difficult. It's tense. It's paced out, right? There are elements where like you are kind of, there's a rhythm to the fight, right? Usually it can go from like you have total control to it feels like a knife fight in a phone booth sort of environment. So what I wanted to do is say it has a set environment and it's small. It's a 4x4 grid, which immediately puts you pretty close to most people. 4x4 grid was very intentional to make it tense. Because if there was a lot of space, there would be a lot of like dead turns where you're just kind of moving closer to each other. Or you'd really easily be able to kite enemies if you had a ranged weapon. So I was like, you got to be on top of each other. So like, here's an example grid, right? 4x4. These X's represent permanent terrain, so there's ways to immediately close the terrain even further, right? So we've lost 4 squares of our 16 squares. We've lost a quarter of our squares of movement just from having this permanent terrain here. And now these skeletons are going to chase you around. That was very intentional. I wanted it to feel very tense. And then combat basically goes through 5 steps, and that's a round. And I think, understandably, when most people read this, they're like, oh my god, there's a lot of steps and everything, and there are, but once you get into the rhythm of it, it becomes extremely natural. So I want to kind of just highlight the rationale for why I did the steps, why I made the steps that I did, and why they're in the order that they're in. Again, this tech here is largely borrowed from that roguelike dungeon crawl game that I was creating, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, something like that. Very first thing that happens is you determine the enemy actions. So just to go down here, right, here's what an enemy card looks like. So here's a ghoul, right? It has 4 health. It's an undead enemy type, in case that matters for like weapons and stuff. The range that it attacks at is if it's in the same space as you or in an adjacent space. And then these are the actions that it can take. And you roll a die for each enemy, and you know exactly what it is. So I'm going to just roll a die here real quick. The ghoul, I rolled a 5. So that means on its turn, like for this round, the ghoul is going to move 2 spaces. It's going to deal 1 harm if possible. It's also going to gain a health because it's just a healing ghoul, gross sort of thing, right? So the ghoul, that's what it would do on its turn, right? So you determine what an enemy is going to do, and that is very intentionally the first thing that happens in the round. Because what is combat in a Souls game often like? It's learning enemy movements, right? Learning their movesets, learning what they can do. And so many enemies have a auditory or visual cue as to what they're about to do, right? You'll hear a sound, or you'll see them move in a particular way. Their arm will move in a certain way, or they'll shift their body, and you know the moveset that is coming to kill you. So that needed to be the first thing in the round, so that you as the player knew exactly what the enemies were going to be doing. Now it's up to you to figure out how you're going to respond to it, but you have that perfect information, which you gain through playing Souls-like games. You move the enemies after that. An important thing to note about enemy movement is they will always move towards the closest range. This is how we solved, like, what do we do if an enemy has same and adjacent range? Like, if they're already at adjacent, are they good? Enemies will always move at the closest possible range. So enemies that can move to same, they will get to same. Same is also a thing that very, very rarely can you, the player, attack at same range. That was intentionally designed so that you are always trying to keep away from the enemies. They can like bombard you at close range. You can't handle that. Pretty much all engraved weapons work at adjacent or further away. So many enemies are very intentionally designed with same range as a means of them just dogpiling you and kicking the shit out of you. So they move, they do anything else, like some of them can like summon enemies or lay down traps and stuff like that. Then you figure out what you're gonna do, right? So you've got your weapons, and you take your stamina dice, which typically is gonna be 2d6 unless you found some item in that realm that's gonna make it better. And you're gonna figure out what you're going to do. Let's go find the weapons here. So like here's the starting equipment that you can grab as an engraved, right? So let's say I have the sword and shield, right? I would roll 2d6. In this case, I got a 6 and a 3. All right. What can I do with a 6 and a 3? Now I can assign these dice to my weapons however I want. So I can put the 6 over here and get 1 movement and deal 3 harm. Or I can put the 6 over here, get 1 movement and block 2. And then I have that 3, right? The 3 is over here. It's just going to let me block 1. The 3 over here, move 1, harm 2. Now I'm trying to work out what's the best possible thing for me, right? Do I want to prioritize getting a lot of movement, blocking and dealing a decent amount of harm? Do I want to have less movement but deal more harm and block less, right? On a turn-by-turn basis, it's a puzzle. How can you, with the dice that you've rolled, best deal with the perfect knowledge that you have of what the enemies are going to do to you? And that's what a Souls-like game is to me when you play combat, is I know what my weapons can do. I know their movesets, I know their range and everything like that. I've learned what the enemy can do. How can I win this fight? Right? How can I on a moment by moment situation adapt to what the enemy is doing? There's a number of other things that you can do in combat, like using gear and like summoning dice and stuff like that, which we don't need to get into, but I wanted to kind of just highlight that's the intention here, is I wanted it to feel like a puzzle, and I think I've done a pretty good job. Then you get to move, so you know what you can do. You bought some movement from your weapons, maybe. You can move, and then all harm is dealt at the same time. So that was also very intentional. You don't deal harm to enemies first. They don't hurt you first. You hurt each other at the exact same time. So you know how much harm you're going to take and how much you can deflect with blocks and stuff like that. And you know your ability to kill enemies, and you will attack each other at the exact same time. There are certain rules and weapons, of course, like everything in RUNE, that are exceptions to this, that might allow you to hit first or something like that. But that's generally the mindset. Once you do that, you just keep going. Go through that process again. Determine what the enemies are going to do during the next round. Roll those dice. Start moving them. Figure out how you're going to respond. Deal that harm. Do it again until either you are left standing or you've been killed. You're going to die a lot. And when you die, you go back to that sigil point and you start it all over again. You can flee a fight. I've never fled a fight in my entire life, but some folks requested it as an opportunity. You can do it. I've never fled. I've always gotten myself killed. Another couple things that I just wanted to highlight here about combat is the terrain and hazard stuff. Right, a 4x4 grid is tight, but it's also boring if it's just a 4x4 grid. So it's important to have some stuff going on. Permanent terrain is just there to like take up space, mess with line of sight and stuff like that. difficult terrain has transformed a lot over Rune's existence. Difficult terrain at first, and for a while, was something that just slowed you down. So you needed a certain amount of like movement to move through it, like basically double movement, and that was annoying. It was really annoying. Ended up in a lot of situations where you weren't like moving, and I wanted movement to feel like a thing you had to do a lot, hence like enemies attacking you at the same space. And what I realized more so, and this revelation happened when I started my replay of Demon Souls, because you know they did the PS5 update of it, you know, like re-release of it, and I was playing that, and I was, you know, in this hallway swinging my sword and just hitting the wall time and time again, not hitting the enemy, just bashing my sword into the wall, and I was like, fuck, this is difficult terrain. This is difficult. And so difficult terrain just turned into this thing where if you're ever fighting on a space that's difficult terrain, you just do less harm because you're losing your footing or there's things in the way, and that made so much more sense and felt a lot better than the movement curse or penalty that it was before. Hazards are cool too. There's not a ton of them in. I mean, they are like they're sprinkled throughout the realms and stuff like that. I think it's something that I'm going to see a lot of players, like designers, mess with. Hazards are like traps and stuff, so it's like stuff that gets left on the map for certain triggering situations. I think it can be really cool. I didn't particularly use it a lot. We don't need to like go into the weapons and stuff because I kind of already talked generally about it, but more or less, weapons are a set of actions. An intentional thing to note here is actually that weapons don't always have something that for every dice value, right? So the longsword on a 1 doesn't do anything for you. A 1 is a waste of a roll. Now, I kind of skipped past it earlier. You can sum your dice together and get them, so maybe that 1 can be summed with your other die, but like a 1 just doesn't do anything. Like if you remember that shield earlier, its lowest value is a 3. So 1s and 2s aren't going to help you very much. So when you're ultimately deciding what weapons you want to have equipped, either from like the starting lineup or as you gather stuff, you need to think about like your dice roll probabilities and things like that, right? Like if you just roll up with a great axe and an erupting flame, which is a really cool combo, 1s, 2s, and 3s don't do you any good individually. You're gonna have to start summing those together. It's just 4s, 5s, and 6s. So that was an intentional thing to make it so that you had to decide which sort of weapons you wanted to use. Versatile weapons got that name from Will Jobst. Will did the editing for this game. They used to be called two-handed weapons and didn't really love that name. And Will came up with versatile, which is an infinitely better name. Basically, they're weapons that have two different forms, right? I fucking love Bloodborne, right? I don't know. I go back and forth on whether or not Bloodborne is my favorite Souls-like game or not. But the trick weapons in Bloodborne is such a fun thing to do, right? So there are weapons in this game that you can kind of basically do trick weapon stuff. And the intent behind them is that actually you need to do that summing thing in order to use them, right? So this goes into this like beefy two-handed weapon mode where your lowest value is a 5, right? But anything that's an 8 or above, so you gotta start summing dice, lets you do some massive stuff. Moving, dealing 4 harm, and cleaving, which just kind of like sweeps the floor with people that are out there. Items and gear and stuff like that. This is stuff that has changed so much. So this will actually be kind of interesting to talk about because the gear has changed so much from what it was before. I knew that I wanted there to be like other things that you could have on your person besides your 2 weapons that helped you do things. Like armors and amulets and rings and stuff like that. But I didn't want to like bog down those with... I didn't know how to do it. I had a number of different options. And when I was at a pretty consistent and steady draft of Rune early on, had 3 different types of gear in it. Passive gear that just kind of always gave you a bonus, just like +1 move. You just always had +1 move every turn, right? Or something like that. +2 health, right? Then you had charged gear and locked gear. Which I don't have examples on the screen because they don't exist anymore, but locked gear was this thing where the gear had dice values that you needed to hit, just like weapons, but you would put a die, your stamina die in there, and it would lock in place. You wouldn't take that stamina die back, but as long as you kept that die there, you gained a passive bonus. So it was like the passive gear, but you had to like you had to get a specific value to activate it, and then it just kind of always was going on. Now that only made sense when previous iterations of the game had it where you had more stamina. You had stamina for like each thing you had on you. So naturally you would have to have at least like 3d6 stamina so that if you lock something in, you weren't totally fucked on using your weapons. And then the other one was charged, which was you could take any die you rolled. Let's say I rolled a 3. I put it on that charged weapon. I now have 3 uses of that, and it would have some sort of effect, right? And I would decrease the value of the die, and that item was used once. So like, you know, something that gave me +1 harm this round. Boom! I use that I activate that thing. Decrease that, but that stamina die is gone, right? It's been charged into that item, so it's kind of like the locked thing, but you spend it out. And these are all fine ideas, but passive is obviously the best because you don't have to spend any dice for it. And the others were it just got tricky with like stamina dice and everything. Because I generally liked keeping it at 2d6 stamina. And adding like 3 and 4 stamina got tricky. Because if you weren't using it on your utility gear, then you were just like always getting exactly what you wanted with weapons. And so this revelation happened while I was in Korea over the summer. I was taking a walk at night. It was a beautiful night out. And kind of just had this, I was talking with a few folks who were doing some like RUNE development, had been working on their own stuff and talking about it, and came up with this concept of the criteria effect, the if-then statement, essentially. That gear that you have is basically a glorified if-then statement. If this thing is happening, then you get this thing, right? So the Amulet of Dawn, if you ever roll a pair, right? Doesn't matter what the pair is or anything like that, you get to heal 2 harm at the end of the round, right? That's it. It's not something that you have to lock your dice away for. You don't have to consider like spending some of your valuable stamina on it. It's just, sometimes it happens. And some of these criteria, some of these ifs, you have more control over, right? So, like for example, going back down to the starting stuff, the Red Crown. If there are 2 enemies in at least, or if there are enemies in at least 2 adjacent spaces, you deal a lot more harm, and you also take a lot more harm. You have more control over that, right? That's something that you can control. You can dictate being around enemies or not around enemies, right? So this conditional sort of gear just clicked. It just clicked and made so much more sense, and it worked better with the concept of like the builds that we were going for with this. And like Hindenburger has said, the gear is so much more straightforward now. I'm so much happier with how gear works in the game now than the 3 types of utility gear that we had before. I just think it's so much better. Consumables are going to be like your one and done things, allowing you to like heal yourself, or one and done things. They're very, very realm specific, so they don't come with you between realms. You just something that you like note on your character sheet or on the realm reference sheet, and then when you use it, it's gone. Unique consumables are going to be unique pieces of things in the realm that oftentimes you need to access delves and stuff like that. The last piece of gear that I think is important is the runes, right? When you kill rune lords, you get a rune. And your character can have 3 runes equipped at a given time. If you've played Elden Ring recently, as a recent thing, you've got all those different kind of like trophies and medallions and things like that. So those little keepsakes essentially that you can wear that give you small boosts, right? Like a little bit extra health, or a little more resistance in this thing. They are things that are designed to help give you a little more control over your build. They're not supposed to be game-changingly powerful sort of things, but they're just like passive bonuses or like cool one-and-done things that you can do. So you get a starting rune as, you know, as a character here. You might just want more health, right? Boom, you just have more health. Or once per fight, you can use a weapon twice in a single round. Normally, you can't use a weapon 2 times in a single round, but you can use this rune once per fight, and you can do that, right? So there are these little bonuses. And so it doesn't get overwhelming because you got like 2 weapons, you got a utility gear, you've got some runes. Most of these are providing like conditional or passive bonuses, and then you're mostly just thinking about the puzzle of your weapons. We don't really have to get too much into this. Like I said, like you have health, stamina, and lore. Those are your stats. That's it. You are pretty much made up of your stuff, your equipment and your consumables and stuff like that. A thing that's important to note about Rune in terms of advancement is you aren't getting more health or more stamina over time. All of your leveling up comes from getting more stuff. So getting new weapons, new spells, new runes, new gear, right? And this is a question that a lot of people asked at PAX, and I think it's a fair question, is what's the replayability on a game like this, right? Like, there's that element of, like, once you know what points do, like, when you play it again, you have that good, perfect knowledge. And, how I responded to that is, I mean, if you're anything like me, you didn't play Bloodborne just once. You didn't play Elden Ring just once, right? You played it again and again and again, trying new builds, right? Trying totally different equipment and seeing how that felt. And that's what you can do with Rune, is not only are there 7 realms for you to explore just in the base game, there's all the third-party stuff, but like going through a realm once with like a sword and board build and then going through it with like all spells is gonna feel different. It was my second playthrough of Bloodborne or Elden Ring diminished because I knew some elements of the story or I knew that there was an ambush around this corner. No, it was still awesome and fun. I was trying it with my new weapons. So that's where like advancement and replayability lives in Rune, through that sort of stuff. And I think again, if you're playing this game and what it excites you is that it's a solo Souls-like experience, I think you're just gonna get that. We've already talked a lot about enemies, so we don't need to really go into it other than point out Farley's art is so good. Unique enemies are a slight variant. You know, you got those mini bosses out in the world. These are the one enemy type that when you kill them, they don't come back. Just like when you kill bosses in Souls-like games, they die. I had to write this note here because it happened too many times in playtests where somebody would deal lethal harm to a unique enemy while also taking lethal harm, because remember, harm is dealt at the same time, and they're like, is it dead? Does it stay dead? So I had to like specify like, they're dead. You both kill each other at the same time and it stays dead. It doesn't reset. I just love that it happened so many times in playtests that I had to add this note here just to clarify. Oh, thanks, BLG. I'm glad that you like the non. I think the way that the non-weapon gear has changed has really improved from its early iterations. The Rune Lords. These are the bosses. Each boss is totally different. Just like the uniqueness of the realms, which is something that we haven't dove too deep into. Like, you know, the Ruined King, which is one of the bosses, the boss in the main book, has 2 phases, right? So you gotta kill them twice. Other bosses might not have 2 phases, but they've got other things going on. So Rune Lords are always very unique. Speaking of, and this is just kind of the thing that I want to highlight here, the book here is here to give you like the core rules, but each realm is going to challenge those rules in little ways, right? Like the realm clock of no 2 realms are going to be the same, which means the player's going to have to kind of change the way that they think and track things. The death penalty in a realm is going to change. All these things are like, and you know, people in the third-party stuff have changed lots of stuff. Like, random encounters being added, or some paths are safe and others aren't, or a whole bunch of things, right? And so it's really important to read the rules of the realm and have them override any expectations you have based off of reading this book. Obviously, you're going to travel between realms as you kill off bosses. That's your chance to reset your lore, get your health back. It's also your chance to change your runes. You can't change your runes once you've started a realm. You can't change the runes that you have equipped. You can change your equipment whenever you want, and I mean you can do it here during the travel time. But you can always swap out the weapons you have. But the runes that you carved into your body when you entered that realm, those are there. Because if you try to peel those off and change them, the Rune Lord in that realm is going to take it. And you can't let them take it. So in those spaces in between, you are free from fate, and you have the ability to rebind runes the way that you want them. So you might find that the runes that you have are not good for the realm that you're in, and you're like, I'm going to another realm and I'll come back with something else, and it'll help me. It'll help me. This whole section here, I really enjoyed writing the playing rune section, because it is I wrote it as if I'm sitting down and just talking to you. I even write it like that, right? I'm going to write to you like we're sitting together at the table. This is a very, I won't say informal, but less technical part of the rule book. And it's just kind of telling you, like, what does it mean to play a game by yourself? What does it mean to, like, not have a story told to you? That you have to put the story together through environmental storytelling. This is a really important rule. You're going to make mistakes. And you're going to make them a lot. I still make mistakes when I play the game. Sometimes I forget to move an enemy, or sometimes I forget to mark some damage, or forget to mark the clock. And it doesn't diminish my experience of playing the game. It's part of the game, right? It's part of the game. I also give lots of advice on how to play the game in, like, physical format versus digital, in case that's the sort of stuff that you are into. And then you're ready to get started. Now you're ready to do the thing. You get 10 health, 2 stamina, no lore, and you get some starting equipment. And then that's it. And then you're off to the races. And we're not going to go into the Grim Coast itself, because I want you to explore that on your own when you get there. But the book ends with a realm for you to explore. The first realm that I created. I thought I had a lot of fun writing it a long time ago, and it's cool to see people. This is going to be kind of like their first experience with the game. And like I said, we're not gonna flip through the whole thing, but I just wanted you to kind of see that. So yeah. Oh, and every realm has a realm sheet, which is, I think, important. A reference sheet that helps you track stuff specific to that realm. And then here's more of Eddie's art at the end. That's Rune. That's Rune. That's kind of the design intent, but behind a lot of the decisions. That's a little history in terms of how it got to be the way that it is. I'm very, very proud of it. You know, at time of recording this, it isn't out yet. It'll be out very soon, but if you're watching this later, then it's out there in the world, and you'll be able to pick it up if you want. But I'm really, really happy with this game. I'm really proud of it. It was very different than anything that I've ever done before. It was a cool challenge to take on in 2022 to do something like this. I had a lot of fun doing it. I'm really looking forward to continuing to support it. We're going to do a Rune Jam, of course. We're going to do all sorts of stuff. So hopefully you found this interesting or informative. I appreciate everybody hanging out, chatting, or commenting later on. And hopefully you enjoy Rune. Let me know if you do. Let me know what your playthrough's like. Let me know what your starting equipment is, and what the first realm you went to was, and how did it go? How many times did you die? But yeah, we'll wrap up the commentary there. Thanks.